What's up, y'all? You are watching the Lorraine Lindsey podcast, and we are here with another episode of The Mindsetters with the beautiful lipstick ladies. I am a life coach, mindset coach, and a friend. So without further ado, let's get it going, y'all.
Let's do it.
So again, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to make a really quick announcement. As I have said before in previous podcasts, not only do I do coaching, but I'm also a public speaker, and I am getting ready to do a very important event. It'll be taking place on Thursday, July 22nd. It is the Hope, Love, and Unity Stop the Separation. It is a thing where everyone's coming together to talk about domestic abuse, domestic violence, and also human trafficking. There is an amazing ensemble of people that will be there, including some NFL stars, special guests that is a sports agent, amongst some amazing speakers. So if you can come out and support this cause, you can go to www.unsilencedvoices.org, or you can send me a message. And again, if you like what you listen to today, please remember to hit the subscribe button and like our content. We love comments. We love topic conversation. Talk to us. We want to hear from you. All right, ladies. So let's move on here. Today, we are going to be talking about overcoming disappointments. And the reason why I wanted to kind of talk about this subject is because me personally, I have been dealing with quite a bit of disappointments in my life recently. And I'm going to be very candid today just because I feel like it's relevant. And I want to have that honesty just to connect with the audience. But, you know, when my personal relationship was a disappointment for me because it dissolved, I was going to be married to someone and it didn't work out. And we completely severed our relationship altogether at some point. Relationship, we talked about friendships in the last couple episodes and just disappointments in friendships. And I've had some personal disappointments with certain, people in my family, which I'll keep that very private because it is a personal matter. But, when you go through a lot of disappointments and they kind of seem to happen within a certain time frame, you start to really question, or at least I did, I really started to question, well, how high are my expectations? Or what is it about me that I'm starting to feel these disappointments? So I started doing a little bit of research, as I always do when I try to get these talks. And I found this really good article that was in the Harvard Business Journal, the psychology. And so I want to read this little quote, and then I wanted to kind of just go right into it. Okay. It says here, disappointments are inevitable, and how we cope with them is often a defining moment in our lives. How we respond to disappointment is often influenced by our upbringing. Some people seek to avoid disappointment by underachieving, setting their expectations permanently low, while others seek to avoid it by overachieving, by setting their expectations unattainably high. Regardless of which we lean, we can learn to respond healthily to disappointment by adopting a coping style that seeks to understand what happened, checks whether our expectations were reasonable, reevaluates our perceptions and behaviors, and seeks positive solutions instead of dwelling on the past. Introspection can be helpful, but rumination is often not. Although disappointment is inevitable, being discouraged is always a choice. Mm-hmm. And I thought that kind of summarizes the article. But I thought, like, when I read that, I thought, wow, that's really profound. Because number one, it's talking about whether we ruminate on disappointments or whether we just kind of move on. So let's start with the first tidbit, which I can't remember, but Kwon put up there. Oh, identifying. So here's I was like, where am I at? So I forgot to bring my notes, but identify. So here's my thing with coaching, and this is what I want to start to do more so on the show, is help people to first identify certain things when it comes to whatever topics we're discussing, and then how to create new things to kind of get out of the mindset of what's holding you back. And so on this one, it's the whole thing. So the first thing I want to talk about with disappointment is, well, you can skip that part. I won't ramble on about that. But understanding what happened. And this is, for me, the biggest thing sometimes, where when you're in the disappointment, it's hard to, like, your mind wants to victimize yourself, right? So when you're going around in your head, like, what happened? And trying to understand that. So can you ladies relate to that? And then I'll share something personal for myself as well.
So I'll just share the story from Costa Rica. We went on a trip couples retreat. It was crazy. But anyways, I had a huge disappointment with who I was dating at the time. And it was hurtful to experience that. And I was disappointed because there was promises made. There was, I had a different expectation of what was going to happen. So in me processing what happened in my disappointment, I realized like what happened was not a reflection of me. I wasn't going to allow it to change my self-esteem about myself, or like, I just decided like that's what he's going through. And the way he handled that situation was a reflection of himself.
Mm.
And so many times we, like you say, become the victim of what somebody else has done to me. And I'm gonna try to no longer be a victim to what people do to me, because my expectation in the past has been for these people to, or just people in general, friends, family, loved ones, whatever. The expectation we put on other people to make us happy or just be 100% will set ourselves up for failure every time.
Right. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
The expectation.
Right.
The expectation. You were going to say something,
No,
Shirley?
I think there's freedom in that. When you let go of expectation. I know Tony Robbins says, change your expectations for appreciation, and that changes your whole life, right?
Right.
And that's on anything and any level. So I understand that completely. But I think we also should have a healthy level of expectations for our life, for our life individually.
Absolutely.
And who we invite in our life should meet that expectation that we want to draw in for our life. Not because they're responsible for it, but that's because we want that life for who we are, and we're also growing, right? So what I'm hearing from you and all of us, really, there's growth. Like when things no longer get us, it's because we've grown, right? We've changed our lenses. We see things in another way. And I often say we can't see the whole picture if we're inside the frame. So we need people to help us see what we can't see. We need communication to help build on that so that we can evolve and grow. But expectation, that's tough. I know I have a daughter. We're all mothers here. There's a certain expectation I'm learning not to, on my daughter. You better, do your homework. You better, whatever. But that's our role. That's the role we're in at that time. But as we become adults and on our own, we can't dictate what other people are going to do. We can only hope and pray that they show up at their best.
And I think, and I'm going to go back to, the evaluating what happened. And I'll say for me, particularly when it comes to my last relationship that I was in, the disappointment in that relationship and the fact that it failed was something I ruminated for a long time. Where especially because the first time we were broken up, and we broke up for about a year, and I really ruminated in it then because I was so disappointed, and I was disappointed in the expectations, and mostly the expectation was, why don't you get me? Why don't you understand who I am? And I can say that person probably felt the same way. Like, why doesn't she get me? When we got back together, I felt I really set the expectation high. And as I look back and reflect on what happened, I realized that's what happened. Because in that year that we had taken off, I really did a lot of personal work on myself. And so the assumption was, if I did the work, clearly they've done the work. And the separation between the two of us is going to be enough to make us really appreciate why we're getting back together. So, when that relationship started to dissolve, it was because of an expectation of a behavior that I had hoped had been resolved, because at one time it was something where we were both participating in those behavioral patterns. And I'll be vague because I want to be respectful of him. I still respect him and love him, but I want to be respectful. And what I ultimately realized in the end, especially when the situation led to my son getting involved, I went back. I was so hurt that my son had to be a part of our crap, and I went back, and then the disappointment kept coming again and again. And even though it wasn't with the same intensity, it was still there. And the person looked at it as like, well, she's still here. Or at least this is my assumption. I don't want to speak for them. She's still here. So that means that it's not, that she's getting past this. And in the end, when the last straw that broke the camel's back, it was like that epiphany of saying, I'm not disappointed in him. I'm disappointed in myself. And I was ashamed. I was embarrassed to think my son knows. A lot of people know. the conversations, and I was so disappointed in myself. And I said, I can't blame always the other person for the disappointment. Sometimes I have to see myself in it. And how do I get out of that? How do I stop being disappointed in myself? And that was, I have to make a decision to finally leave and not look back. So that was my way of evaluating what happened, how I was perceiving what was happening, and really the honesty in that, and saying it's myself. At first it was him, I blamed him, and now it's like me. I'm disappointed in myself because I keep going back. I haven't set clear boundaries in this particular behavior, and that behavior is not going anywhere, right?
I think my epiphany with the disappointment from what I was talking about, because I had went back to this relationship after I shouldn't have went back, but I gave it a second chance, and knowing that I was disappointed with him, but I was disappointed with myself as well, just to make the same choice again, you know what I mean? And then like thinking about it, I don't want to keep being disappointed in my choice.
In your choice, right?
In my choice. And to have somebody do the same thing twice and thinking it's going to change in the future, I mean, it might, but I don't want to be
fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice,
right,
shame on me.
like
Yeah.
shame on me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not even going to try it a third time. So,
right.
but it's a peaceful feeling, right? And it's like,
I think when you take responsibility in some of the disappointment, and mind you, there are things that you can control, and there's things that are disappointing that are out of your control, right? But I think when you, as hard as it is sometimes, because you, again, a lot of times we just want the other person to see, and we want so bad for everybody to change. But it's just, it is liberating when you say, you know what, I'm disappointed in myself, and how am I going to fix that? So I want to go on to the next point, which is, what did I learn?
That's everything.
So I think
Yes.
when disappointment, it's like, okay, the first thing is, you know, what happened? Really looking at the situation from a stronger point of view, instead of being the victim in it, which doesn't mean you weren't wrong. It doesn't take away you're wrong, but just to really look at it. The second thing is, what did I learn? This is what we need to identify. What did I learn?
Which is why there's never a failure. It's not failed. It's ended. It's over.
Right.
So there's learning in all of that, and that comes with our growth and experience. In bad situations, that's a learning experience, and if we can find that, I think that helps with the expectations or lack thereof,
and not to reside
whatever.
in the feeling of it,
Yeah.
like the feeling of disappointment. Like you can reside, you could live there. It can just,
And it could take over your life.
it can take over.
You could become so afraid of disappointment from people that you just stop yourself from connecting to people.
Even with disappointment in yourself in the work world. I mean, I know like when I started, like if a transaction went bad, I would just be so disappointed, and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm the worst. I'm never going to be good at this. And then it started becoming like, okay, these are just learning lessons I take from it. I know what not to do next time. And then you just build yourself up. But if you continue to live in it and like, I'm never going to be good enough, I would never be where I am today.
Right. You know what? Also, what I learned from my experiences, and not just with my personal relationship, but even with friendships, the disappointments in friendships, is number one, I'm learning that to raise my standard of who I am and what is acceptable for my life. Okay. So there are certain things in my relationship, for example, that was beautiful and amazing, and I will cherish all of that. But there were certain things that were unacceptable. And so for me, what I learned in it is that I have to raise my standard of how I feel that I can be treated, especially when the treatment is coming from the fear, the side when you're afraid. You know, I don't feel like the person mistreated me at times, and I did the same because they loved me. The love always showed up amazingly, but it was when the fear showed up that I got a different side, and I didn't set the standard for myself. I taught the person how to treat me. I taught them what was acceptable, and that's why certain things were repeating themselves. And in friendships, it was the same thing. It's like, I have this really high standard for my friends that may be unattainable in some regards for certain friendships, instead of saying, no, let's just meet them where they're at. And I'm learning to ease the reins a little bit where I need to, but raise my standard where I feel is fit for me.
Well, you don't have to go all in, but you could just, where you stand. that standard. I mean,
Right.
and also I recall we did a podcast a while ago, standard versus expectation. Do you
Right.
remember that?
Right. Yeah.
So when we talk about that, I hear the same thing in what we're discussing now. It's the truth. We set standards for our life. Expectations is outwardly. It's something we put on outside of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I believe. A standard's internal. We hold the standard to our life. Everything else is expectations. It's out. That's how I understand the words to be.
No, I agree 100%. Let's move on to the next point, which is, again, part of identifying. The third part of dealing with disappointments is to say, what were my expectations? What were they? Like, be clear with that. Because again, there are times when our expectations are set way too low, and we literally make that a permanent thing where we become pushovers and let people walk all over us, and we tolerate things, we make excuses, we rationalize. That's when your expectation set is too low.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the ones where it's impossible for anybody to reach it. Like, they are never going to be perfect enough for you. And I run into that. I will own that there are times where people can feel like nothing I do for her is enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. I mean, I keep it real. But you know what the funny thing about it is, it's just, for me, I've always interpreted that as like, because when I complain, I'm very specific. This is the problem. Not your chivalry, not how romantic you are, not the love that you give to me. I'm not complaining about those things. But those that you doing right by me by being a sweetheart or by being loyal to me or being faithful, those aren't rites of passage. Those are things that I appreciate and that I love and adore, but they're also what people do when they love one another. And so for me, when a person's pouring so much on that side,
you're doing the bare minimum.
it's like,
that doesn't dismiss this. Yes.
You haven't even made it to the first floor yet.
But I know it can come across that way, but it's almost like I know that I can come across as like, well, yeah, you're great over here, but I need those things to go away and then you'll be perfect.
Yeah.
And not giving them grace to make mistakes sometimes, and I'm learning that, except for the deal breakers. There's no
exactly.
The deal breakers.
Right.
I that's where I would bend too much.
Mm-hmm.
I would give grace and everything else, and then I would be hard on everything else. But the deal breakers, I would literally give grace in the deal breakers. And so I'm like, I got to flip that.
I'm guilty of that too.
No more grace on deal breakers. These are my standards. If you cross this line, it's over. Now, these things, are these personality conflicts? Do we have communication problems? We can work on those things, but so that's part of, I think, helping with overcoming disappointments. So moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could say something about the deal breakers. Like, is it that when there's a deal breaker that happens, you're like, well, you start rationalizing, right? Like, how bad of a deal breaker, where did it range in the bad part?
But I think that's where we have to get clear with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for example, for me, infidelity is a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm.
But that standard is so high on my standard scale that there is no second chance with infidelity for me. If there is infidelity, you're out. I tried that one time. I had one relationship and that person cheated, and it was something I was not able to let it go. It wasn't in me to let it go. So it was so emotionally draining for me that I will never put myself in that situation again. If they cheat, they're out. You never say never, of course, but it's such a deal breaker for me. But there are other things that I say is a deal breaker, certain behavioral things and certain certain things. I'll just leave it at that, where I say it's a deal breaker, but then I'm like, okay, you promise you won't do it again, or you're going to work on that and we'll work on that together. And then it happens again. And then I keep beating myself up. And then I put myself through this unhealthy emotional roller coaster because I'm not really clear on my standard on that.
I think it's 3 A's for me: abuse, addiction, and adultery.
Ooh, I love that.
That's it right there. If we can't, because if you're addicted to something, then you can't love me that way. That's infidelity too.
I love that. Abuse,
addiction, and
adultery.
Mm-hmm.
Oof, that's good.
That for me, that's to come back from that. There's got to be really some deep work for that. For me, in my
that's
heart.
strong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's strong. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Substance addiction, right?
Yeah, any form of addiction, gambling, substance, anything that takes away from you, your life, that you can't depart from to be a part of our unit of life and love that way, that's a problem. I mean, addiction's
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. Creating. So we've identified certain things. And so the next step would be to create. So it's like, okay, this is what I identify are problems that assist in my rumination of disappointment. How do we create something different so that way we can get out of it? So number one, get outside of your own head. This is, I feel like this is the disease of modern man is overthinking. And a lot of times, often when we are very disappointed, we really ponder it a lot. We think so many different ways. Like in any time, for example, the relationship thing with friends, when I was disappointed in friendships, and we talked about this last time, literally for a period of time, I was so in disbelief and so incredibly disappointed by the friendship and how it fell apart that I literally could not stop thinking about it. And I was fixated on it to the point where it was like unhealthy. So it's like, that's where it's like almost like you have to look down and you say, okay, I'm going to look and say, this is what happened. I'm going to really see where I'm at in this. And then I got to move on. How do you get out of your head though? How do you get out of your head when you're disappointed?
I try to find what the message is for me.
You learned.
I have to remove the other person with that. Otherwise, I mean, that's my work. It's
Right.
happening so I can grow and learn from it regardless. And also, depending on the friendship is how far I take it. You know, I love everyone and it hurts. But if there's value there, I'm going to go a little extra than I would
That makes
the
sense.
other person, you know. So there is a level of expectation, I guess, because of the bond that we've created in our friendship to know that. But if that doesn't, if it ends there, then I have to accept that for me, that's the end. Not that it
Right.
failed, but it's expired for that
Mm.
time. And that helps me.
So I'll talk about like disappointments in myself. There's been times in my life where I've been so disappointed that literally it was like mind consuming.
Mm-hmm.
Learning from those experiences now, fast forward, I make way better choices. So just learning to, when you're going to make a bad choice and it's going to really affect you. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, that now. Like, especially now, like, I don't ever want to be in a place again where I'm in my head so much about my own failure or my own disappointment for the choices I've made. So just being aware of the choices that I made.
And having grace for yourself.
And having grace.
Yeah.
And learning that to forgive myself,
So I guess as if you are in your head, it's just you have to shift your focus of what you're thinking about a thing. Let's go on to the next one because I know our time is limited today. So the next one is, are we listening to what others are saying to us? You know, and this is good and bad when we're dealing with disappointment. It's who do we go to for the conversations about our disappointments? And I have found, like you ladies, I love because you guys are such perspective people that for me, it's important when I am dealing with disappointment that I find people that I trust that will be honest with me.
Yeah.
Even if it's not exactly what I want to hear, they're coming from a place with no bias and they're not going to feed the mind with the drama about the disappointment.
Absolutely.
And, because you need to go to people who are going to give you perspective on who you are and your role that you play in your disappointments. So that way to me, your accountability is your power. When you can be like, oh, I did that. Okay, this was my role. Gosh, that sucks. And now I'm disappointed in myself or whatever. But it makes the choices more clear because then you can decide, I'm going to move on from this situation, or maybe it's something I need to go back to the situation and better communicate or whatever it may be. Let's go to the next point. The next one says, refocus. So it's kind of like what we were saying about being in the head, right? It's like, what do we focus on? And I know it's cliche to say, but what we focus on truly does grow. So if all I'm focused on is the disappointment and the mistake, or now it's a regret or whatever it may be, it might be like, I got to focus on what can I do with my life now moving forward? What can I focus on in that, I guess? You guys want to kind of like say anything to that?
Focus isn't, I think it's led by a belief. We're focused on something that we believe in our head. So we're trying to go forward to it, you know, but focusing, it's, you know, kind of like the law of attraction, right? If we keep thinking about this one thing, it's what's going to show up. But if we don't,
I'm always looking at her nails. I'm like, I'm focused on her nails.
yeah, but I mean, again, you're right. But also having enough self-awareness to catch yourself doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, to get out of that, and having friends that you can be vulnerable and open and honest with, that's safe, right? Because that's important too, to have that space. We all need that. We're not alive to be alone. I don't believe that.
Right.
At
Right.
all.
We're tribal for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to the next point. Could we have done something different to arrive at a different outcome? Now, this is probably a hard part with disappointment. Okay, so I'll go back to my example with my relationship. I thought about that a lot, especially the first time we broke up. I remember thinking I was so disappointed. I was disappointed on how it came to an end, what were the causes, et cetera, et cetera. And the thought process in my mind was, what could I have done differently? What could the outcome have been different? And when I went back at a different time with a different mindset, I felt like at this point, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed I kept going back, but now I'm clear.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I could do differently this time is stand my ground and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Is to say no. And the only way I can let this person know that I can't have that kind of treatment anymore is to really finally just say goodbye.
Well, when you love, you owe it to yourself and your partner to go there for yourself. I mean, it's, again, someone that's been married a long time. I've done that many times I have to refocus. What's my part in that? That way I can see him differently.
Right.
Because otherwise I can get very stuck on you. I'm the princess. I'm this, whatever. But once I see my part, I have this, like, I almost hurt for the other person because I recognize I didn't know that's who I was showing up being at the time. So you don't know until you're like, oh, wow, I guess I was that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
when
that's
you
how you
see
felt.
yourself in that mirror,
Totally.
right?
Yeah, or even to stop to think about that other person is not you. Like their thought pattern is completely
Correct.
different than who you are. I can't assume that we're on the same page of life all the time.
And I think that's so hard sometimes. I know I'm difficult. I will own it. I am very difficult. Like I think everybody thinks like Lorraine, and people don't.
No, it's true. We're like, you guys don't get
But-
What?
No, because I'll get frustrated. I get disappointed when people don't understand the way I think. So I'm like, you don't get that? You don't get that? And I get frustrated. And so it's like, but to your point, not everybody has the same upbringing. It's like what we said in the very beginning when I read that thing. It's like everyone's upbringing is going to dictate their lens and how they see things, how they evaluate their life. All right, let's go on to the next.
Go
ahead.
So what I want to say about the disappointment, my last situation, I wouldn't have changed anything because the way I reacted after, there was a time where I would have felt like I wasn't good enough or, what's wrong with me? And the fact that I could say,
Stella got her groove back, huh, girl?
Butterfly.
is like, there's nothing wrong. I am good enough.
Right.
Yes, you
So,
are. Yes.
Going through that, the way that I did, there's nothing I would change.
Amen.
It
I'm-
represented your growth. The
grateful for
experience
the-
showed you, wow, I've really grown here.
Right. I'm grateful for
Yeah,
the
that's
experience.
actually
and
really
I've
beautiful.
learned to be grateful for my experiences, good or bad.
Isn't that the key, right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I think that's the whole point.
Yeah.
I'm actually at this point in life where I'm like, okay, life, you've brought it on enough for me. But I just look at life like, okay, I was just being prepared. But I got to learn my stuff, learn who I am, and so I can show up and really just open my heart to love that I want in the way in which I want to be loved. Friendships in the way I want friendships, communication with family the way I want communication with family. But it really, when I could say, oh, it starts with me, and I can own that and see where I'm at in those things, then there's certain things I can really let go of. And then there's certain things, and I could be open. Like at this stage in my life, I'm like, I'm open. I want to receive the love, have the love, get the love. I'm surrendering the flag to the disappointments in life.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go on to the next point here. What can I positively do in my life moving forward?
I think we're doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking
We're-
about it. We're
we're
sharing. We're being honest and open, and we're helping others by serving our own experiences. I think none of us are in the shadow right now.
Yeah. And I asked the question for people who are out there listening to say, as we're discussing these steps, these are things that you all out there can do as well, and ask yourself these questions. And I think for me, like when my son left, he just left to New York. But one of the things that my son, he said when he came to the show, and he also said it to me while we were in New York, and he said, "Mom, you just got to promise me to do you, like just live your life."
Yeah, I heard that. I thought that was so sweet.
And and it's like, yes, like, I mean, do I need to stay in Vegas? Can I move and go someplace else? Like, I'm just this free person now, and I'm ready to explore things. So it's like, what can I do next? I just let go of the disappointments. Like, okay, I'm disappointed, but I got to move on. I don't want to live in disappointment, because then it robs me of all the amazing things. Like when I was in New York, for example, I'm just like looking at people. I'm seeing faces. I'm actually paying attention. I'm not like walking around like Eeyore looking for my tail. Everybody hates a donkey. Like I was really like.
It goes back to your state of mind.
Yeah.
Because we can be overly responsible. And because we are overly responsible, if something doesn't go according to that responsibility, we get disappointed, right?
Right.
So all of that's a self thing. It's like almost like an indirect self-sabotage, but it's reality.
And you know what, too? A lot of things a lot of people you're disappointed in, a lot of them are moving on with their lives.
They have no
You're
idea.
sitting there worried about and thinking about and pondering, and they're off doing their life and doing their thing. And you're missing every breath that you're taking over a disappointment. It was a disappointment. Time to move on.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Next one. I think we're getting ready to conclude here. Get clear on expectations, which I think we kind of talked about that, so we'll mull over that. Could we have been clear in our communication and what we were expecting from others? Do we really know? And if you guys go back and watch the show, and I'll be happy to send the PowerPoint to you. Do we really know what we expect from ourselves? And I think we kind of talked about that as well. Did you want to add something to that?
No, that's a
I
good
think we're always
question.
learning that, though. As life evolves and experiences occur, we're changing too. And I know my expectations for myself have changed so much as I get to know who I am every day of my life. And I love me, and sometimes I don't love me as much, but I still love me.
Right.
That's just the way it is. But you learn that, and that's not. I mean, not everybody does, or has the opportunity to really understand even what that is, right? So we speak a lot about self-love, and we speak a lot about things that have to do with our own beings, right? Like us being who we are. But sometimes people walk around with no knowing, and they can't get these messages because they're not connected to themselves.
They're not connected to themselves, and their self-love, but they are connected to their stories and their defeat in their life, and they don't sometimes and it goes back to that thing about having that lower level expectation, where you're just like, you become somewhat of a doormat to life. You let life happen to you instead of for you. You were gonna say something, Carmen?
Just like with the expectations of ourselves, when you do introduce other people into your life that are intimate partners or friendships or whatever, also being clear on what your expectation of that person is.
Right.
What does that even look like? I mean, I asked myself, what did I even like about this particular relationship? What was it that I liked? And I didn't have, he was great, but he was great.
He was a companion, yeah.
And it was like, those don't even align with my own expectations for myself. So a lot of times we set ourselves up for disappointment.
So that gave you clarity.
Exactly.
That's
it gave me a lot of clarity.
Yeah.
For me, I remember the biggest gut check I had, and I was doing counseling, and I was sharing with my counselor about my relationship, and I was saying all these wonderful things about the person, and all deserving. And then I said, but then there's this thing, and she said this to me, and I will never forget it.
Mm-hmm.
She said to me, have you ever imagined your life without the but? And I remember that like angst inside of me, thinking I had so much prior disappointment from other relationships.
So you're expecting it.
And no, there were different types of disappointments. And so what I did, because this person didn't disappoint me in that way, the way that he was disappointing me, I was like, well, at least it's not as bad as this other person. And I compared disappointments instead of just saying, no, the expectation of Lorraine is to be an abundance of love. That way she can receive love in a way that doesn't make her feel depleted or or hurt or, abused. And that's what I've been feeling in my relationships, was some form of abuse, and at times me being an abusive person. And I'm like, the expectation now is no more. That was my childhood. That was my pathology. I grew up in violence and abuse, which is one of the reasons why I'm talking about it on Thursday. I grew up with that familiarity. So when I was in relationships where one day everything's peaches and roses, and the next day there's some form of abuse going on, either I was, like I said, either I was participating or was very familiar and accepting. And I finally said, I no more. 41 years later, I don't want abuse in my life.
Do you think that's part of your life's journey and path, though?
I think it's necessary. I think it's part of me coaching. I think I've gone through a lot, and I believe that I've persevered. And it was a lot of mindset stuff. It was a lot of me coming out of my own mind and really being clear and being accountable as well. And so, yes, I'm so grateful for all of those experiences, but no more. I don't need any more of it. And I'm clear about that.
You change your expectation to appreciation.
With myself. Yes. Lorraine, get clear.
Yeah.
Stop loving and loathing yourself at the same time, which means you cannot accept people who do not love themselves. You can't. You can love them from afar. You can have compassion for them, but they can't be intertwined in your life until they got to do their own work, So anyhow, do you guys have any conclusions before we head out?
I just want to say, I don't want our message to come across either like we're never going to experience disappointment, or when those disappointments happen,
it's natural to life.
We'll know better how to navigate through them.
That's
because
exactly
they're going to happen.
This is a guide to help navigate through those things that are going to happen in life, because it's inevitable. Some of us learn the lessons or get our path early.
You're going to disappoint. We're all going to disappoint.
And I go back to the
point,
whole,
Carmen.
Our relationships teach us so much about ourselves. And I mean, good or bad, I don't know how much growth can happen if you're not in some form of relationships, and you can't grow just being self.
Right.
And you're exactly right. Now, that's such a great point. Like, disappointments are going to happen. They are inevitable. But we get to choose how we cope with disappointments, how we attach them to our lives, and whether or not we ruminate in them. Yeah. And so that was a beautiful point that you made, for sure. So, ladies, again, I think this was a great show. Yes. For those of you, we zipped through, we wanted to get through this show in a specific time frame. So if there are questions, or I have a PowerPoint on it with all those questions and things. So if you want that, please send me a message. I'm happy to send you an email with that PowerPoint with those questions, and also the article about disappointments. Thank you again for watching.
Thank you.
Bye. From my heart
to
yours. That was good, I think.
That was good.
Yeah.